Hey everyone, welcome to the final part of the Build 26 build log. In this video, we're going to take a good detailed look at the finished product. As always, take a look at the water cooling loop, how I've built it, the fittings that I've used, the custom cables, the lighting, everything about the system, and then finally, we'll take a look at the test results and the overclocking. So you can see I'm now doing the finishing touches to the system. I'm just adding the lighting. And in the background, the system is benchmarking. I'm actually in the BIOS right now in the process of doing the overclocking. But let's take a good look at the finished product. It's time to take a look at the water cooling loop and all of the fittings that I've used. For the tube in this build, I used Mayhems 16mm borosilicate glass. Now there's quite a lot of fittings in this loop, and that is because you can't bend glass. You can get pre-bent glass, but only at 90 degrees, and there are certain other limitations, as I've mentioned. So also to fit the metals theme of this build, I decided to use fittings for the bends. So you can see there are quite a lot of fittings in this loop, which I'm finding increasingly people are preferring more bends compared to fittings. But there are a lot of reasons in this loop that this amount of fittings were used, and I'm now going to take you through the logic of it. So you can see just here we have an offset. Now you can't do an offset in glass because you can't bend your own glass, and you can't buy pre-bent offsets that are just completely random like this. I could have easily done this in acrylic or PETG, but in glass it's just not going to happen, and I couldn't put this at the other end because it wouldn't have achieved the specific offset that I needed. And you might be thinking, well, I could have used glass for that little length just there. Well, it would have ended up with about 5mm of tube, which is just pointless. You end up with all these big, bulky, hardline compression fittings in this tiny little bit of tube. So if it's below a 30mm length of tube, I will not do it because it's just too many fittings close together. It's not worth it. You might as well use an extension as I have. Same thing there vertically, and same thing horizontally. There wouldn't have even been, 5mm of tube in those sections. Same thing up there. There probably would have been about 15mm of tube if I had have done that one. And this is the longest one over there. There might have been 20 or 30mm of tube if I had have used tube for that. But yeah, just really not worth it. So let's take a look at the drainage system. I've used a Bits Power mini valve as always, connected to the pump with a mini D plug, and one of these beautiful premium stop fittings. Coming out of the pump, I've used a 90-degree single rotary, then a 90-degree dual rotary, and then a 45-degree single rotary, which I don't often use, but as you can see, it worked out just perfectly there to go straight into the radiator. And, for those of you who don't know, I sometimes get criticized for using too many fittings because of sections like this, but I think that people just don't realize how tight the builds are that I'm doing. For example, in Radium 2, cramming dual loops into such a small case, you have no choice. Have a look at how short that length is just there. There's no way you would be able to use tube there, no matter what you did. You have to use fittings over short distances like that. Now, you're not going to be able to see it, but on the other side, I've used a 90-degree dual rotary and a 90-degree single rotary. And behind the reservoir there, I've used a 90-degree fitting, which just has a female thread on each side, and then hardline compression fittings on each side of that. So that's actually 3 fittings to get that 90-degree bend. Then a 90-degree single rotary, 30mm extension, 90-degree single, 20mm extension, 90-degree single, 90-degree dual, 25mm extension, 90-degree single. Coming out of the radiator on the other side, I've used a 10mm extension and a 25mm extension. So I had to do that to get 35mm. There is no 35mm extension, only 30, then 40. Well, there might be by now, but yeah, I just didn't have any. 90-degree single rotary, 90-degree single rotary, and 15mm extension. 90-degree single, 90-degree single, another 90-degree single, and then a 20mm and a 15mm extension. So that is all of the fittings in this loop. For the lighting, I've used a single dark side 30cm LED strip, which initially I had on the underside of the top panel, but I decided to move it onto the other side of this panel here so that it's shining towards the top radiator. And the reason I did that is because it was just a bit too much light. And I also wanted to put the top of the reservoir in the dark so that the lighting that I've added there could work properly. And also, you can see that kind of part of the motherboard is in the dark now as well. So that worked really nicely, the position of that LED strip. Now, to power this LED strip, I have it running directly from the motherboard. And you can see the cable coming down in this corner. Now, these little cable management components that I use are usually ModSmart, and Performance PCs has a giant collection of these, all different kinds. Phobia, every single different brand. So that is where I get them from. And you can see that I have it running from the CPU fan header on the motherboard. And this is a great thing to do with your LED strips because, well, you can't really do this with RGB, but there are special connections for RGB on motherboards now. But it means that you can control the brightness because you can actually go into the BIOS and use the fan RPM settings and profiles to change the power output of the header. And you can cut the brightness down to half or whatever you want to do, and you can actually make it consistent as well, because that was my concern when I first tried it. Is it going to keep changing depending on the temperature of the components? But yeah, you have to play around a bit, but you can figure it out. You can actually set it up so that you have a consistent brightness. So we obviously have the lighting on the memory, which just looks amazing. I mean, this memory looks incredible enough, but then you boot the system and you also have the amazing lighting. So yeah, I'm really, really impressed with this memory, and it just fits this build so well. Originally I wasn't sure about the colors. You can see the colors on the cable there, but it just all ties in because of the memory. Without the memory, I think this build would be very different, if we used a different memory. So we also have a single dark side 3mm white LED in the Singularity Computers Protium medium reservoir. Now I have the LED running off the fan splitter, which is a Mod My Toys 5-way 3-pin fan splitter from Molex, which I have on the other side. Let's take a look at what I've done with the custom cables. Now, the custom cables in ITX and compact builds can often be more difficult, particularly when you get to the installation and training stage. And you might be able to see that with the 24-pin and the 8-pin EPS here, that there wasn't a lot of room for them. And what you have to do when you don't have much space is just reduce the amount of cable combs that you use and instead rely more on training the cables. And also, if you build your cables right, if you put a lot of time into them and you don't have any twisting, if their sleeve is pulled nice and taut, they're going to be easy to train and they're going to sit in position nicely anyway. So we only have a single cable comb on the 24-pin cable. I originally had 3 and I had to remove the other 2 to get it to fit. There's a lot of twisting in this cable due to the terrible pinout on the Corsair AX860i. And there's just nothing you can do to avoid that. So you can have it all nice and clean in the top half of the cable, but you can see down here there is unavoidable twisting, and that is just due to the pinout. It's just always something you have to deal with. The other ends of your cables, 24-pin in particular, are always going to be a bit like this. So not a lot of cables in this build though. Certainly not compared to a big Caselabs build with 20 fans and an Aquero. But we have the U2 cable over here, which was difficult to sleeve, but I found a way. I might actually do a quick guide on that next time I do it, because a lot of people seem to ask about sleeving those unusual types of cables. But you can see that comes across the top of the memory there and joins up with the SATA data cable. Initially I was quite concerned about what I was going to do with the data cables back here, the U.2 and the SATA data cable, because I thought that they were going to end up highly visible, mainly due to the U.2 cable. I mean, this isn't just a straight cable. It has SATA power as well, pointing back in the other direction about 50 millimeters from this connector. So I also have to run a cable from that but you can see that it's ended up really clean, and that's only due to the way that I was able to sleeve that cable. And then we have the SATA data and power for the hard drive, and all you can see is the connections, no cables. And that was really important for this build because the hard drive and SSD are quite a major feature down here. Well, they weren't initially going to be. I didn't really intend for them to be that way, but once I saw how amazing the heatsink looked on the bottom of this SSD, and then I thought I'll remove the sticker from the hard drive, and yeah, it really helps and supports the metals theme. The PCIe cables I've just run straight down the back of the graphics card, the shortest possible route to the power supply. And you can see that they cross over the data cables again there. You can see the front panel cables in the black sleeve there, and also in that bundle is the pump RPM cable, and they connect right next to each other, which worked out quite well. And the front panel cables, completely custom as always, to the power and reset button. And this cable here in the corner is Molex to power the fan splitter. So I have a Molex to 5 3-pin fan splitter running the 4 radiator fans directly, and also the dark side 3mm white LED in the top of the reservoir. So that's about it for the custom cables in this build. Hey everyone, welcome to the final part of the Build 26 build log. In this video, we're going to take a good detailed look at the finished product. Hey everyone, welcome to the final part of the Build 26 build log. In this video, we're going to take a good detailed look at the finished product. As always, take a look at the water cooling loop, how I've built it, the fittings that I've used, the custom cables, the lighting, everything about the system, and then finally, we'll take a look at the test results and the overclocking. So you can see I'm now doing the finishing touches to the system. I'm just adding the lighting. And in the background, the system is benchmarking. I'm actually in the BIOS right now in the process of doing the overclocking. But let's take a good look at the finished product. It's time to take a look at the water cooling loop and all of the fittings that I've used. For the tube in this build, I used Mayhems 16mm borosilicate glass. Now there's quite a lot of fittings in this